In this video, we're looking at poly beams and curved beams. So in the model I have open, if you click on this beam, it's modeled as a poly beam and it's with a 90-degree corner. And in this beam over here, we've got the same 90-degree corner poly beam, but on this handle, if I click on that handle, we've set the type to rounding and the radius to 2000 to create the rounding effect for us. So also, if I go into transparency mode, I've taken the liberty again of adding some column reinforcement, so we've got some context to work with. And then lastly, what I want to do is I just want to double click, go to display, and over to the cast in place parts. Instead of showing merge parts, I'm going to show separate parts. And that will, make the cast in situ parts appear as individual items, as for in precast almost. And it just gives us nice edges to work with and to snap. Afterwards, we'll change it back to cast unit or merge parts rather. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to isolate this set, right click and say fit in all views. So we're only looking at that. And also what I want to do is I want to go over to our presentation filters or visibility object groups and say CIP beams only, so our beam is isolated. So what I intend to do here is to show ligatures down this side and this side at, say, for instance, 300mm spacing. I also want to create 3 bars on the, or 2 bars on the bottom that overlap in this corner. And I want to create 3 bars on the top that overlap in the corner and have some sidebars. So let's see how we can do that. So first of all, I like to use the crossing bars for this exercise. And the first thing to do is to go and set our rebar size and also make sure that we're still dealing with class 5. And then let me actually just reset this so we can go through this line by line. So for our rebar catalog, the engineer is asking for a 12 ligature. For our class, we'll stick to the traditional class 5 for ligatures. And then for the target distribution, I'm going to go for 300. And then for the start and end, I'm going to go for 150, just plus minus the half of whatever your target is, just to give you some working room at the start and the end of your range to work with. So if I hover over the set, before I accept that, I'm going to hit this adjust guideline location. And then, as you can see, Tekla wants to create faces for this bar, all the yellow marked ones, and that's unnecessary. So what we can do is we can just grab the line and just place it beyond that corner somewhere. You see, if you're on the corner, it still creates a face. So you've just got to go inside the corner there somewhere, let it go, and then you can say create those bars. We can do the same on this side. Click the section, trigger our adjust guideline location, and then bring this node again just to the inside of that bar, that corner there somewhere, and say, okay, create the bars. Now what we can do is, while we are, before we make fine-tune adjustments, we can say, okay, well, actually, let's do that first. I'm going to make sure that my leg faces are switched on. I'm going to click on the bar so we can light up the faces and the nodes. And then I'm going to hold in my Alt key and select across those handles. And then I'm going to say move special, linear, and I'm going to move this handle to that inside corner there and say move OK. So that deals with that set done, as you can see. And then the top set. If we now hold in alternate and select over those handles, again we can say move linear, and we can grab that handle all the way to the end there and say move. Now what we've created here is 2 ranges of ligatures, the one obviously dominating and the other one stopping short. Okay, so with that, we can now just add an end modifier onto that. And for this, I'll just switch off my leg faces so we don't get too much clutter. So I'll click on that and say in detail. I'll load my default values to reset my palette, make sure everything is okay. And let's just stick with the square for the visual so it doesn't get too crowded. And we will accept that. And that looks pretty good. And then because these ranges, this range, if we just switch on our faces on, if I click on this, because they end there, I also like to pull my leaders, this to the same extent. So if I click on here, I can just hover over that and then pull this arrow back to the in part there, so that sort of lines up. I can also grab my spacing line, just let it light up, grab this arrow to the same point there. Now everything is sort of sorted. That didn't move. Quite stubborn today. Oh no, it did move. It did move. Maybe it was just didn't update on the screen properly. Okay, so having done that, let's move over to this one and then say in detail. And this time it doesn't matter because we are actually occupying that full range. And that sort of completes the ligatures. Now let's move over to the main bars. And the way I'm going to do these main bars is I'm going to go longitudinal this time. And then say the bar I want is a 24 main. And again, as per usual, we'll make that 4, which is our blue color. We will strip out our start and end offset. And for our target, we're going to pick a number, and the number we're going to say is a 2. We want 2 bars. And then what I can do is I can hover over the bottom here and say OK, and it will create the 2 bars for us in that end. We can do the same on the other side. Click these and say OK. We can do the same on the top. We could have done this in one go. And then same on this side. Click that one and say OK. Now, we can clearly see here that already we've got a bit of a layer issue. But with crank bars, we can sort that out. So I'm going to click on this bar, make sure my visibility is on. I'm going to click on the face. And I'm going to force this face back into the second layer so they do interfere with those. And we'll use a cranking bar to sort that out. I'm going to do the same here. So because we entered this one last, it will be in a third layer to that one. So I'll go second there. So that's all forced in. Okay, so now what we can do here is we can pick this set, and I'm going to switch off my visibility faces off. I'm going to pick this set, and I'm just going to add an end modifier, and I'll load my standards again, just a normal end modifier, and I'll hover over here and say, okay, I'm happy with that. I'm going to do the same on the top and say add end modifier, just somewhere there. So that's pretty cool. So that works out all right. Cover is correct. And then while we're here, we might as well address the issue with the tie into the columns as well. So what we can do here is end modifier. And then this time we say end offset, and we'll use the 533.5. And for if you don't know where I got that from, go back to video 1 in this chapter, because I clearly explain how we calculate that, and we can apply that. And then in here we can do the same, and we've still got the settings, and apply that. And I think while we're here, and it's going to be the same on this end, we might as well do it here as well. So we click in detail, click on this edge, it extends it, and then do the same here, end modifier over that edge, and that pretty much sorts that out. Now let's have a look at what's happening on this end. So let's start at the bottom. The first thing we can do is to, I think, just move this bar in a bit, because it's, as you can see here, it's clashing with that. So what we're going to do is look at our start and end guideline. So we want to change the start point. So if we go start point, we go, I think 115 will work. Probably a bit too much, but it does miss the ligature a bit. Okay, so that's good enough, I think, for this exercise. We'll do the same on the top. Make sure it's the start, it is the start, and then grab 115 here and push it that way. Okay, now next thing is let's put a hook on this. So if I click on this, I'll go over to end modifier, and I'll load my standard, so it's a normal hook, and I'll hover over somewhere there, and that gives us a hook at the end. And once we've done that, I can click on the same bar and then click on end modifier again, but this time say I want a crank. And if I hover over there, it will generate a crank for us. Now look at this. We don't have the clash anymore. These bars work out very nice, but the crank is way too long. So if we click on this, we know that this beam Well, we don't know it. Let me show you. If I click on the beam, it's a 450 beam. So if I click on the bar and I click on this modifier, N modifier, which is the crank one, I can then say the standard crank is not a standard crank, it's a custom crank. And we want to extend this by 400. And if we do that, it's you can see it sort of works very well. Now the reason it's 400 and not 450, it's the beam less the cover. It's 25 a side, so that gives us 400. So that really works well there. The other thing is sometimes when you do that, Tekla has a tendency to just move the hooks out a little bit, so we just need to go back and make sure, and sure enough it does. So what we can do with this is we can click on, while we've got that selected, what we can do is we can just go to adjustment type, end offset, and we can just pass a, say, negative 53 or something in there. And if we look at that, that's good enough. That's good enough. Okay, so that pretty much solves that out. So we can do the same on here in detail. And what we can do with the in detail is, well, actually, a quick way to make sure you've got exactly the same settings is to click on this bar, grab this one, control grab that one, and then say right click, copy special linear, and we can just copy from the bottom of the beam to the top of the beam. That way you pretty much ensure that you've got exactly the same settings top and bottom, and just like that, we have those bars nicely cranking into the others with a hook, with a crank inside. Now, we still need to look at the distribution steel, and for that, I think the best option here is to look at the crossing. So if we do crossing, we get something like that. If we do, for instance, longitudinal, we can also do that, but it's only going to give us the one side. We can always add a face that side, but let's just use crossing, it's easier. So we go crossing and we go again, we pick our size, and the engineer is asking for an N16 main, and we'll change our distribution to traditional red again, or class 2. And for the offset, that's the distance from this and that side. I'm going to pick 250. And I'm going to pick another 250, and then for the number I'm going to purely say, yeah, I want a number, or I want a target spacing of 300 for the distribution. And then if I hover over that and I pick this side and that side, I can then say okay, and we get our generated bars over here. Now before I go and split all of this to pieces, I think what I'm going to do is just address the issue of the cover here. So you can see we've got a bit of a cover issue here. These bars are pretty much all flush with that side. So if we push this thing an additional width of that bar, 29 mils, we should be okay. So let's see how that works. If I switch on my leg faces and I click on this face and I say I want an additional, say 20, plus the ligature, because it's working back from the edge. So we need to put in 39 there. And that, very interesting. Because I didn't, I just used the random number of 53 on that. So I'll have to eye that. This is where the sort of, if you look at my first video in this chapter, how I worked out things precisely, this is what I'm alluding to is if you just guess stuff, you keep on changing numbers here until it looks good and it doesn't clash anymore. And okay, I think this is okay, it will work, and then it bites you if it doesn't work. So it's always good practice to go watch that first video in chapter 5 and how I exactly work out these covers. Now I can't remember what I did there. 42. Click here and I make 42 here, and that will push it off just enough so it doesn't clash with these. And now what we can do with these bars, we can click on it. I'll switch off the visibility, and what I'll do is I'll go say give me a splitter. And then what we can do with the splitter is we can say it's a standard splitter, and let's just split it on that corner there. And then, okay, we've got a orientation problem. So if we click on the splitter, first of all, I want the arrow to point up, so I'm going to swap it. And then secondly, it's drawing it on the left-hand side. If we go over to the tab area, we can see it's left. But if we make that middle, modify, and also this, make this parallel, modify, we now get the situation where we have those bars lapping nicely inside the others. Okay, so all we need to do with these bars, we need to extend them. So if I click there and I say end detail, and I'll load my standards, and then for the hook, I'm going to say I don't want a hook. And for the adjustment, I'm going to say I want an end adjustment, and I'm just going to take it 400 into the column. And with that, I can just click on this edge and extend it. And I can go over to this edge and extend that. That deals with the distribution steel on the outside. Now all we need to do is look at the distribution steel on the inside. And for that, we can use the crossing bar again. And since the settings are the same, I'm just going to click and then pick this leg. And I'm going to pick that leg and say OK. And that will give us a big, massive L bar. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick this bar. And while we've got our end modifier set, set to 400 extend, I might as well pick this edge. It extends it without a hook. And pick this edge. It extends without a hook. And now all we need to do is look at the inside here and split this. So if we go to splitter, we've got the normal lap, parallel, middle, and that should just split it. So if we split it, we see we get our crossing bars, which is typical of an inside corner. And then we can see it's a bit long. So if we click on the splitter, we can then go to standard lapping, custom lapping, and we can bring that down to, say, for instance, 600 mils. And if we do that, we have pretty much a clash-free beam. So that's as simple as that. If we, for instance, now go and say, give us the standard again, so we can see everything, and we look at this beam, we can see how nicely that reinforcement works with the column. But now, normally with beams like these and being cantilevers, you'll probably find that the engineer will specify much bigger or much more reinforcement in the top than the bottom. So now, because you've got everything sorted, you don't really have to work so hard. You can just click on that and say, the engineer wants 3 bars instead of 2, and everything will just work. If you click on that one, you can change 2 bars to 3 bars, and that will just work. And all the property modifiers and end conditions, everything you've specified will just work. And just like that, we've got that one sorted and done. So now let's move on. I'll go fit entire work area, and we'll move on to the second one. And if I grab this one, and I'll just isolate that one, fit in all views. So we've just got that one. What we can do with this one, again, just go to standard and isolate so we only see our beams. And in this one, pretty much the same process. What we can do with this one is, again, start with the crossing bars for the ligatures. We click on ligatures and then just go make sure that we change our size to N12 as leak stirrup. And then for our class, back to a 5. And then for the offsets, again, I'm going to do 150 start and end. And then for our adjust or our distribution, I'm going to pick a target, and the target's going to be 300. Okay, with that in mind, what we can do now is we can pick the beam cross section and we can say okay, and then we get something that looks like that. And that's pretty much exactly as intended. So if you click on this, you can see our guideline here shows that it's going to cover the full, if you want to call it, one side of the beam. Now, reinforcement, as you know, with rebar sets are always created perpendicular to the line. Now, we want to make use of this edge, so we can make use of this following edge feature. But for that to work, if I click on this and I click there, nothing happens. Absolutely nothing happens. Now, for us to be able to use that, we need to drag that line. If we click it, we can drag it down to the bottom. So now it is actually on an edge. And then also we can click on this handle and then just drag this handle to the opposite corner. Now that we have that, we can see that all these bars are now orientated again perpendicular to our guideline. And if we click on the guideline, we now hit follow edges. Tekla then follows the edges for us, and all these bars are now created perpendicular to that one single line, and they're all part of one set. All right, so pretty much we can do the same with the end modifier for the hooks, the ears of this ligature. So what we can do is click on the leg and then go over to end detail. And what I'll do is I'll just reset my defaults. And I'll pick the 90 degree and everything is okay. But down here, instead of picking a single edge, you see here, this is a single point, which means you can just pick an edge, a straight edge. I'm going to click once to be able to click multiple points. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this as a start point on that edge there, and this is an end point on that edge. And once I've got that, I can middle mouse to accept it. And again, you can see Tekla's got a straight line there. But if we click that, and because we're on edges here, we can now just hit our follow edge feature. And Tekla will then follow the edge for us. And as you can see, all these ears are then 100% in place for us as intended. And that takes care of the curved polybeam stirrups. And now we can look at the curved bars. Now, I've heard that a lot of people have a lot of challenges and they prefer to go to rebar groove curved bar, but this has a this has an issue that you can't really put the bars down the bottom. You can put them up the side and up the side, but the radiuses don't work really well. But I'll show you how we do this in rebar set. So if we go to longitudinal bar and we head over to our property pane and we say main bar being a 24 main, okay, and we change our color back to 4, we can then say delete the start and end offset. And for the target, we're just going to use a 300 for now. Let's just leave that. And now what I can do is if I click over this, I can pick this and I can pick the opposite side. And once I do that and I say, okay, Tekla will then create the full set of curved bars for us inside and outside. And now we can start breaking that down into bars to be used on site, straight bars and curved bars. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab this bar and I'm going to say give me an end modifier, and I'm going to keep it fairly simple here because there's a lot to change here and it's going to get congested. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I don't want to hook, but I do want to extend this into the column by, let's say, 400 mils. And then pick the edge here. And because I can't pick an edge because I'm still in the multi-mode, I can just click once, click twice to I'm back in the single point mode. And now if I hover over that edge, I'll get the ability to extend that bar. I'll do the same while it's highlighted on this side. And then I can just rotate around, pick the inside bar. And I need to stop right there because what I want to do is I want to show you the difference between the two methods that I'm going to be using right now. If I click faces here and over this one, I'm going to click this and say extend from this side. And then what I want to do is extend by the 500. So I want to turn the 1200 into 1600 and actually physically extend the face here. I want to do the same here, and it's going to become clear in a minute why I'm doing this. If I do that, Control A, and I say 1600, and I extend the face there. What happens now is that this bar on the inside recognizes the faces all the way to there, but on the outside, the face stops here, and that's an extension, an end extension. Now, the difference between the two is if you want to put a splitter on this bar that's got the extended face and it's got a crank, it's got enough room to work with to actually calculate crank. Where on that, it's going to use the face and it's not going to be able to put in a crank that we want because there's not enough bar. It's going to give you an error. So let's see how that works. So if I hover around this side and I click on this bar, and I'm going to switch my faces off just for a minute, just reselect the bar, and I go to give me a splitter, and I'm going to say the splitter type I want is going to be a type of crank. And let's just leave standard crank at the moment. I'm going to say I want the crank. Let's just say left. Let's just see what happens. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick this line. Now this is the tangential line between the curve and the straight. It's a good place to split. So if I click there, you can see what's happened now. It's given us a crank and it's the wrong side. So the first thing I'm going to do is click on that and just change the direction. And then I get this error. Now this error is because it can't actually fit the cranking. So if we go here on the offset and we move this minus 1000, I think that's the length of the crank, or 1000 rather, I think it's 1000. Okay, so here we can see what's happened now. The crank has been formed, but we need to rotate it again to the other side. If we say now X, that is interesting. Okay, let me just put the other side in. If I click here and I say, click there and I say, give me a splitter on the same tangent, yeah, that's going to split it. First thing we're going to do is click on that, change the direction, and then what we want to, you can see what's happening here. So if we do this to minus 1,000. Oh, not minus 100, minus 1,000. And also we change the thing to left, the opposite. Okay, we've got to do the same on this side. Now you see, I've been deliberately trying what's going on here, and nothing wants to work. Now the reason for that is it's very simple. What Tekla is trying to do is it's trying to create this length of this leg, and I'll just measure it so we can see the distance between there and there. If you look at that, is 1,200 plus minus. Now, if you click on the modifier, it's got a splice of 1,000. It's also got a crank length of 240, which means it extends beyond the limits of this face, and that's why it doesn't work. So what I'm going to do is, if I click here and I delete that split, and I click here and I delete that split, just to recover our bars, and also I'm going to delete this property, and I'm going to delete this property. So we're back to where we were in the normal. What I can do then is click on the bar, make sure our leg faces are on again, and I'm going to also select here and increase this to 1600, like so. And I'm going to do the same on this side, and I'm going to 1600 as so. Now we've got the same setup as on the inside. But what we can do now is if we now click on that bar, and I'll switch off the leg faces, we don't need them now. If I now click on that bar and we go to splitter, we can then say give us a crank on the left, and if we now pick that line, all of a sudden it cranks. We've got a perfect 1,000 millimeter overlap there. We've got enough room to split here because our face carries on. It can actually do the calculations now. Now, if we go to the other side and we pick this tangential line as well, we can see we get a breakage. It's because of direction. So if we click on this and we say do it on the right, modify, it then fixes that up. And that pretty much cranks the bar. So this is our starter bar out of the column. It's a cranked bar. It laps with a circular bar, and it's symmetrical this side. So those bars are going to have exactly the same properties. Now we can flick to the inside, click on this bar, trigger our splitter, hover over this tangential line. We get the area again. Click on this and just flick our right to left, modify. That fixes up that crank for us. And if we go over to this one, we can do the same splitter on the tangential line. It's a problem. Click on the splitter, flip the switch to the other side so it can actually fit in the crank. And there we go. We now have all our bars cranked and everything is good. Now, what we do normally with these beams, we have distribution steel on the side of a different size. Now, what I'm going to do is I am going to do that, but I'm going to do it after I insert some center bars. Now, how do we insert center bars? I do want to show you something. If I click on here and I go to visibility of the leg faces, each one of these faces are now individually. Tekla sort of automatically did that for us. But if we want to copy a bar and offset the face or give it more cover, it's a pain to select all these bars. So how do we do that? How do we create bars a bit smarter than that? So what we're going to do is I am going to go and say, give me a bar by face. And in the bar by face, I'm going to say N24.4, that's good. In the distribution is not a target anymore. It's going to be a fixed number, and the number is going to be 2 bars. I only want one at the bottom and one at the top. And that's it. So when I hover over this face now, you can see these little cyan lines here that show you, depending on which side, closest to which side you are, it will give you the orientation. So we want to be closer to the bottom. We also want to make sure that we're in the near face. And then when we click there, Tekla will then add a third bar for us. So if we go in here, we can see inside there is a third bar for us. And it's also in the third layer. So what we can do now is to add the rest of this. We can click on add a leg surface or add a leg face. Now, if we click add a leg face again, it's going to ask you 1, 1, 1, 1, all these little segments. But if we say give us a leg surface and we hover over this, that's one surface. Now, don't worry about the LN0. We'll fix that up now. And then we can trigger over to leg face and we can pick this one as a last spot. And that one's correct again. Now, all we have to do is click on this face, make sure it's selected. And then what we can do with this is just zero this out for now. And then that we really want in the third layer. So if we click a 3 there, enter, sometimes you can see it's now gone to 2. You need to do that twice. Go 3, please, enter. Now it's given that bar for us. And now you can see we've got a perfectly formed bar on the inside there. All we need to do is to do the additional offset to get it in the center. And if I click there and I change this additional offset to 185.5, I've pre-calculated that. That pushed that section in. I can then click, now I can click at that as one face or one surface, and I do 185.5 there. And then lastly, I'm going to click this one, 185.5, and when I enter there, the bar is then fixed. And if we turn the beam around, we can see we now ended up with a curved bar running down the center of the beam perfectly. And now the same rules apply. If I click on this, I'll switch off the leg visibility. If I click on that, I can then go to end detail and then load our defaults just in case we have dodgy settings. And I'm going to say the hook type is none and the alignment type is of an end offset, and we're going to push that 400 millimeters into the column as well. And all I have to do is hover over this edge and the bars get extended, and I can hover over this edge and the bars get extended. So just like that, with rebar sets, we've now created a center bar magically, and it's also extended into the column. And now in the same way, we can split this bar. Now this bar doesn't need to be a crank bar, it can just be a normal lap bar. So if I click on that bar, I can go to give me a splitter, and I'll load my standards, so everything is just triggered. And then what I can do here is I can say I want a split on this and keep duplicates because there's already a splitter. I can do the same on the other end, click on this tangential line and keep duplicates. So now I've got 2 split bars. So now you can see this is split about the middle, so that's why we get the skirt bar, which is an odd bar. So if I now go and click on the bar, click on this, I'm going to change the direction firstly, and then I'm going to set the lap side to left, and I'm going to say modify. That changes the left side. I will do the same with this one. I'll click on this one, change its orientation, and then say the lap side here is on the right hand side, modify. And then lastly, while I've got that selected, I'm going to click this modifier, hold in my control, click this modifier, and then I'm going to change the lap placement from parallel to on top, and I'm going to say modify. And now if we look at this, we've got a perfectly straight bar there that laps on the inside of that one, which means it's also going to miss the main reinforcement in the column. And if we go around the beam, we've got another lap on that side, and we've got our offset there. And we can see we've got the same at the bottom. So that pretty much completes that beam. For the only exception now is we need to address the distribution steel. Now, how are we going to do that? The best way to do that is to deal with property modifiers. Very powerful stuff. So what I'm going to do to see the effect, I'm going to click that series, and I'm also going to select the concrete, and I'm going to right click and holding my shift and say show only selected. That will give us those bars as we know them. And then what we can do is we can say, okay, click on the bar, and I'm going to switch all my other, sorry, I just want to make sure that I'm on bar visibility. I want to switch off the guidelines. I want to switch off the splitters. I also want to switch off the end modifiers so I don't see them. They don't light up. If I click on this bar and I say property modifier, and I then go and I will load my default, so there's absolutely no change. It sort of flashes this box. I can then say I want a property modifier on this edge. Keep duplicates because there's other property modifier, there's other end modifiers and stuff there. So we'll deal with that now. I also want to deal with one on this edge. Keep. So it deals with those 4 bars, and this one deals with those 4 bars, but I also need to deal with these. Okay, so now that I've got those property modifiers, what I can do is click on this property modifier and just swap its direction around so it's pointing up. I also want to do the same with this one, pointing up. Okay, now that we've got that, we only want this property modifier to affect the internal bars, not the outer bar. So how do we do that? We click on this dimension and we make sure we select this middle one, and then we change Control A to select all of it. We change that to 700 so we can come 150 from both sides. Enter. Now you can see, if you look at the color coding that Tekla is giving you now, these blue bars are going to be the ones it's going to change. The gray bars is going to be unaffected because this does not cover them. If we go over to the others, we can see these are still got a problem. So if I click on this value and I change that to 700 as well, again, we're going to be able to change the middle ones. And if we do the end, 700, now we've got our property modifier set up correctly to be able to make changes to those internal bars. And now it's as simple as we click this modifier, holding Control, click that one, click the last one. Always make sure in your property pane that you've got rebar property modifier 3 selected. You know how many you've selected. And now we can say, how do we want to change these bars? Well, firstly is we want to change the grade. So we head over to our catalog, we pick the end bar, we pick the 16 main bar, we say okay. And then we're going to change our class to our traditional 2. And then we also want to do a modification to the distribution. So we're going to say yes. Now you can see if this is set to no at the moment, so all these are disabled. But as soon as I go say yes, these become enabled and we can change it. Now the start and the end relates to the faces. At the moment the face is the full width or the full depth of this beam. So we need to pull that in so it's in the same length as that one. So that becomes 150 and that becomes 150. And then the creation method, we're going to say, hey, we want the number of and the number of we want is 3 bars. Now, as soon as we do that and we say modify, just like that, Tekla is now fixed up. We have one set of reinforcement, as you can see there, but we have different sizes with different splices and all sorts of stuff. So that's how easy you can do that. So if I redraw and I go to the inside, now with the knowledge we have of that, it's as easy as, let's just isolate this for visual again. So we can do it a bit faster, holding your shift key and isolate them. Now what we can do is as easy as that is, we click on the bar, we click on the property modifier. Now already we've got the settings as before. We can hover over this edge. We can then go and hover over this edge. And don't worry too much about what's happening now. We're going to streamline it now. And we're also going to pick an edge in the center. Okay, now we've got our edges. So all we need to do is pick this one, swap its direction from top to bottom. You don't really have to do that, but I like that system. Always work from the top to the bottom. Now all 3 of them are the same. Now all we have to do is when we click on this one, is change its influence area. And then click on this one, change its influence area. And then lastly, this one, change its influence area. And as soon as we do that, all of them are falling in place, and there we go. We've got our 16s at 300 in the middle, or 3 of them, and we've got our main bars top and bottom. And now if we look at that, we've got a complete beam with the main reinforcement on the top and the bottom, distribution on the side, and we've got our ligatures sweeping around the beam at 90 degree or perpendicular to the spacing line. Now that pretty much concludes it. So if we look at this as a standard with the columns, we can see how well that's worked out for us. You know, we pretty much clash free. I mean, I could have put on the hooks and everything just like with the other beams I did, but I think by now you've probably figured out how to do it. So we'll get to it later. So if we just see our entire model, we can see the 2 beams together, and that's how we resolve poly beams curved as well as 90 degree. Now, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've learned something from it, and I'll see you in the next video.